The manifest listed 43 crew members, 7 research staff, and 1 approved personal companion listed under the category of specialized fauna contained. Commander Yasa read that last line 3 times. She was standing at the docking bay entrance of the research vessel Sindara, reviewing final boarding approvals on her data tablet, when she saw the name attached to that entry. Ray Holt, human, xenobiology intern. She pulled up his file photo. A young man looked back at her, unremarkable in every way. Narrow shoulders, calm eyes, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd of 2. Yasa had commanded frontier missions for 11 years. She had worked alongside Thurvan soldiers, Kethari engineers, and once a Vorith demolitions expert who had 8 fingers on each hand. She had never once felt the need to question a crew assignment. She questioned this one that the Sindara was heading to Mavori's 7, a frontier jungle world with a predator classification of 7 out of 10. Not a place for interns. Not a place for anyone small and soft-looking who had apparently been approved by a senior researcher named Dr. Breen, whose only note on the file read, "Ray is more capable than he appears. Trust the process." Yasa set the tablet down and decided to form her own opinion. She did not have to wait long. Ray Holt arrived at the docking bay 40 minutes before departure. He was average height for a human, which meant he came up to Yasa's collarbone. He carried a single pack on his back and walked with the quiet, unhurried pace of someone who was used to being the least interesting thing in a room. Behind him came the container. It was the size of a small cargo hauler. 6 wheeled legs carried it forward on a slow hydraulic crawl. The outer casing was reinforced durasteel, ventilated along the sides with narrow horizontal grates. It hummed faintly, not from machinery, from something breathing inside at point 3. Docking crew members stopped what they were doing and stared. "That is mine," Ray said simply, handing over his boarding pass. Dr. Breen filed the companion approval 6 weeks ago. It should be in the system. Yasa checked. It was. She approved it without a word because there was nothing technically wrong with it, and because something in the measured way the young man spoke told her that arguing would accomplish very little. The container was loaded into the lower cargo deck. Ray followed it down personally and spent 20 minutes there before returning to his assigned quarters. Delegate Farrick arrived shortly after. Farrick was Kethari, which meant he was tall, broad, and deeply convinced that everyone around him existed to confirm his importance. He was traveling aboard the Sindara as a political observer for the Council, a role that gave him the authority to attend briefings, but not to actually do anything useful. He made up for this by filling every available silence with his own voice that he spotted Ray at the mess table that evening, eating alone over a data pad covered in species classification notes. "This is the human intern," Farrick announced to no one in particular, though he was looking directly at Ray. "I was told there would be a xenobiology specialist aboard. I assumed that meant someone with field experience." Ray looked up. "I have field experience. On what world?" 3 so far. Mavori's 7 will be the 4th. Farrick made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Remarkable. A child with a list." He looked at the soldiers seated nearby. One of them smiled. Farrick, encouraged, continued. "Tell me, small one, what does your species contribute to a mission like this? You cannot carry heavy equipment. You're not built for harsh terrain. You startle easily, I am told." Ray looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at his datapad. "I am told Kethari delegates have poor depth perception in low-light environments," Ray said, turning a page. "I did not bring that up when we met." The table went quiet. Farrick's expression moved through several emotions before settling on cold amusement. "You have a brave mouth for something so small." Ray did not answer. He finished his notes, closed the pad, and brought his tray to the return shelf. As he passed Farrick's table, he nodded politely and left. Farrick watched him go, then turned to the soldier beside him. "I will wager you a meal credit. That one asked to turn back within 2 days." The soldier took the bet. Later, while past lights down cycle, Navigator Solon was running a late calibration check on the lower deck when he passed the cargo hold. The container sat in the corner, dark and still. He almost walked past it. Then he heard breathing. Slow, deep, The kind of breathing that belonged to something very large that was very calm. That he stopped and looked at the ventilation grate's point. Two eyes looked back at him from the dark. They were amber, steady, and enormous, catching the dim corridor light and holding it like two burning coins. Solon stood there for a full 3 seconds. Then he turned around, walked back to his station, and decided that whatever was in that container was none of his business. The Sindara entered the jump corridor at 0300. By morning, Mavoris 7 was 4 days away, and somewhere in the lower cargo deck, something ancient and patient shifted its weight and waited. The bet was decided on day 2, but not the way Ferric expected. Ray was late to the morning mission briefing. Not by much, for minutes, but in a room full of punctual Thurvan officers and one very watchful delegate. For minutes was enough. Ferric leaned over to the soldier beside him and held out his hand. The soldier shook his head. The bet was for asking to go back, not for being late. Ferric withdrew his hand, annoyed. Ray slipped into the last open seat without apology or explanation. What no one at that table knew was that Ray had been awake since 0200. Jump space affected large fauna differently than smaller creatures. The pressure shifts moved through the hull in long, slow pulses that most crew members never noticed, but that something the size of Draven felt in his bones. Ray had spent 2 hours in the cargo hold, sitting on the floor with his back against the container, talking in a low voice about nothing in particular while Draven pressed his weight against the interior wall and breathed in the slow, uneven pattern that meant discomfort rather than danger. By the time the pressure settled, it was nearly briefing time. Ray had not slept. He presented well regardless. When Yasa gave him the floor, he pulled up a holographic species map of Mavoris 7 and walked the room through 3 primary predator classifications, 2 secondary scavenger types, and the specific vegetation corridors most likely to obscure approach angles during a ground survey. His language was plain. His points were precise. He answered 2 technical questions from the science team without hesitation and 1 navigation question from Solon that most xenobiologists would not have been able to answer at all. Yasa said adequate and moved on. Ferric spent the briefing inspecting his own fingernails. Lunch in a mess hall was the worst part of the day. Ray sat at the end of a long bench with his tray and his notes, working through survey coordinates between bites. Ferric arrived with 2 other Kithari observers and chose the seats directly across from him, despite the hall being largely empty. The intern speaks well, Ferric said, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. Very rehearsed, almost convincing. He opened his meal container and looked at Ray with the patient, performative cruelty of someone who had practiced this kind of thing often. Tell me, does your council send you on dangerous missions to prove something? Or is it simply that no one values you enough to leave you behind somewhere safe? One of the other observers laughed. Ray did not look up from his coordinates. Mavoris 7 has 6 distinct canopy layers. The 3rd layer is where most of the ambush predators nest. If we stay in the open clearings marked on the survey map and move in groups of no fewer than 4, the risk profile is manageable. Ferric blinked. Asked you a question. I know, Ray said. He looked up then, briefly, without expression. I answered the one that mattered. He finished his meal and left. Solon watched from 3 tables away. He ate the rest of his food in silence, thinking about something he could not quite name. That afternoon, Ray went back to the cargo hold. Draven was awake and watching the door when Ray came in. He always knew. It did not matter how quietly Ray moved or whether the lights were on. The moment Ray's weight hit the corridor outside, those amber eyes were already tracking the entrance that he was enormous in the enclosed space. 6-limbed, built low and wide, with plated scaling along his spine that caught light like hammered metal. 2 of his limbs were forelegs with claws that had once cut through 2 inches of reinforced hull paneling during a panic response early in their time together. That had been a difficult conversation with Dr. Breen. The scarring along Draven's left flank was old and pale now, barely visible under the new scaling, but Ray still ran his hand along it sometimes out of habit. He did so now. You're doing better, Ray said. Jump pressure peaks in about 6 hours. After that it levels off. Draven made a low sound from somewhere in his chest. Not a growl, something quieter than that. Ray had learned the difference in year one. He sat on the floor. Draven lowered his head until his jaw rested on Ray's knee, which required some careful folding given that his head was roughly the size of Ray's entire torso. Ray opened his datapad and kept working. 2 years ago, he had found Draven on a survey world in the Outer Belt, gut-torn and left in a drainage ditch by poachers who had apparently decided he was too dangerous to transport. Ray had no proper med equipment. He had his field kit, his jacket, and 11 days before the extraction shuttle came back, he had not known if it would work. The first 2 days, Draven had watched him with those amber eyes, and Ray had simply sat nearby, talking quietly, letting the creature decide. And on the 3rd day, Draven stopped growling when Ray came close. On the 11th day, when the shuttle arrived, Draven stood up, still bleeding, and followed Ray to it. He had not stopped following since. Ray closed the datapad and leaned his head back against the container wall. Draven's slow breathing filled the hold like a tide. 3 decks above them. A message arrived in Dr. Breen's inbox from Delegate Ferrick, formally requesting that the animal be separated from a mission on grounds of crew safety and professional propriety. Dr. Breen's reply arrived 11 minutes later. It contained one sentence. I would strongly advise against that. The jungle did not welcome them. It tolerated them, the way something old and enormous tolerates something small moving through it, which is to say it simply continued being what it was and let them deal with the consequences. The shuttle broke through the cloud cover at 0800 and descended into a wall of green, so thick the landing site barely looked real from the air. 3 clearings had been pre-mapped from orbit. Yasa chose the largest and set them down with the kind of control precision that made the soldiers relax. The ramp dropped, and humid air rolled in like a warm hand pressing against every piece of equipment that had been calibrated in a controlled environment. 2 scanners needed immediate recalibration. This was expected. The planet did not care. Ray walked down the ramp with Draven at his left side. The soldiers at the bottom of the ramp took 2 steps back without deciding to. Draven was not in his container. On open terrain, Ray had explained to Yasa before landing, containment created a liability rather than reducing one. Draven in a box was a frightened animal. Draven in the open was something else. Yasa had looked at the creature for a long moment through the cargo hold grate and then said, "Fine, keep it controlled." Ray had not told her that control was not exactly the right word for what he and Draven had. Ferrick appeared at the ramp and stopped when he saw Draven standing in the clearing, in the enclosed spaces of the Sindara. There had been the container between them. Out here, in open air, with Draven's full size on display, the reality of what had been riding in that cargo hold became suddenly and completely clear. Draven stood nearly 3 meters at the shoulder on his 4 walking limbs, with the front 2 half raised and ready. His spine plates had fanned slightly in response to the new environment, and the bioluminescent lines along his flanks were cycling through a pale blue-white, which Ray knew meant alert but calm. "You're bringing that thing into the survey zone?" Ferrick said. It was not a question. "Yes," Ray said. "I want a cage. That is not possible out here. I am a delegate of the Kethari Council. I am formally objecting." "Noted," Ray said, and began checking his field kit. Ferrick turned to Yasa. Yasa looked at Draven, then at Ray, then at the jungle surrounding them on 3 sides, and said, "Move out. Holt keeps the animal. Any objections go in the post-mission report." The column formed up. Yasa and 2 soldiers at the front. The science team in the middle. Ferrick and his observers behind them. Ray and Draven at the rear. The jungle closed around them almost immediately. Visibility dropped to 15 meters within the first 100 steps. The canopy above was layered and dense, blocking direct light and replacing it with a green-tinged dimness that played tricks with shadows. Things moved in the upper branches. Not large things, mostly, but constant. The team's footsteps were loud in a way that made everyone instinctively want to go quieter. Draven moved without sound at all. For his size, it was not natural. The soldiers kept glancing back at him. Every time they did, he was simply there, stepping through the undergrowth with a fluid, rolling gait that covered ground without disturbing it. Ray matched his pace without looking. They had walked terrain like this before an hour in. The forward scanner returned a large predator signature. Single contact, moving parallel to the column at a distance of 40 meters. Then it disappeared. Sensor glitch, the scanner operator said. Humidity interference. Yasa looked at Ray. Ray was already watching the left tree line. Maybe, he said. Ferric had fallen back beside Ray at some point in the last 20 minutes, mostly because the soldiers at the front set a pace he was not built for. He was breathing harder than he wanted to show and radiating the particular irritation of someone who had dressed for a mission without understanding what the mission actually involved. When he reached Ray's position, he opened his mouth to say something. Ray put one hand up, flat, without looking at him. Draven had stopped that he was not tense. That was the thing. A nervous animal freezes with visible strain, muscles locked, attention narrow. Draven simply became still the way stone is still, as if he had always been stopped and movement had been the temporary state. His spine plates had gone dark. All of the bioluminescent light had pulled back to nothing. Ray had seen this once before. Once on a different world, 2 years ago, before he knew what it meant. He had learned quickly. Nobody move, Ray said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the specific flatness of someone who was not making a suggestion. Ferric walked directly into Ray's back. What are you? Quiet, Ray said. I will not be spoken to that way by a Ferric. Ray did not raise his voice. He said the name the way you say the name of someone who is standing near a ledge they have not noticed. There are 4 signatures on that scanner now. Not 1. 4. The scanner operator looked down, then up. He is right. 4 contacts. They are surrounding us. How did he? They dropped the first one as a test, Ray said, to see how we'd respond. The jungle went very quiet. Above them, something in the 3rd canopy layer shifted its weight that Draven's spine plates came back on, slow and deep, pulsing red. Ray had never seen red before. The first one came from above, not from the trees, but through them, dropping 40 feet in a straight line and landing between the 2 forward soldiers with a sound like a boulder hitting wet ground that IT was large. Longer than Draven from snout to tail, with 4 muscular legs and a jaw structure built for lateral crushing. Its hide was the exact color and texture of the canopy shadows, which explained why nothing had seen it until it was already there. For exactly 1 second, nobody moved. Then everything happened. The 2 forward soldiers broke left and right. The science team scattered into the undergrowth on instinct. Ferric went straight back and ran, which was the worst direction he could have chosen, and 2 of his observers went with him. Yasa shouted orders, but the acoustic interference from the dense canopy shattered her voice into fragments. 3 more shapes dropped from the upper layers. 2 at the sides of the column. 1 behind. Behind was where Ray was standing, that he did not move backward. He moved forward 2 steps, getting out of the creature's immediate zone. And then he turned his left and said 2 words to Draven. Nobody in the team heard exactly what he said. Later, Solon, who was pressed into a root cluster 6 meters away with his legs folded under him and his heart doing something irregular, said it sounded like a name and a direction. Nothing more than that. Spoken flat, no urgency, the way you might tell someone where you left the keys. Draven moved, not ran, not charged. Moved in the way that water moves when something large enters it, all at once and completely. He crossed the distance to the nearest predator in a time that Solon's brain refused to accurately record, and what followed was not what Solon had been expecting. He had expected violence. There was some, but what there mostly was management. Draven did not tear into things for the sake of it. He moved between the scattered crew members and each incoming threat with a pattern that looked, from Solon's vantage point, almost architectural. He put himself at angles. He pushed predators off approach lines with his body weight rather than his claws when his body weight was enough. He was reading the field. 1 predator had a soldier pinned against a root cluster 10 meters to the east. Draven reached it in 4 seconds, gripped it by the upper shoulder plating with 1 foreclaw, and physically moved it sideways. The creature scrambled, reassessed, and redirected toward Draven. Draven let it. Another was circling the science team's position. Draven's spine went bright white in a single sustained pulse. The predator stopped, held. then retreated 4 meters and held again. Solon had no idea what that meant biologically. Whatever it meant, it worked. The third had the two rearward soldiers and was actively pressing them into a narrowing space between two massive roots. Draven came around the outside of a tree stand at speed and hit the predator in the flank with his full mass, all of his walking weight thrown sideways like a gate slamming shut. The predator went down and took 3 seconds to get its legs back under it. In those 3 seconds, the soldiers moved. The fourth was with Ferric. Ferric had run himself into a dead end. A root wall 4 meters high and no gap wide enough. He was pressed flat against it, and the predator was 2 meters away, low to the ground, head tilted at the assessment angle all ambush animals use when they're deciding whether something is worth the effort. Ferric made no sound. His voice had gone somewhere that was not available to him. The predator took 1 step forward. Then Draven was there. He had not passed through the space Solon was watching. He had gone around the outer edge of the clearing in the time it took the predator to take that 1 step and arrived at Ferric's position from aside. He placed himself between Ferric and the predator with the deliberate placement of someone parking something heavy in a specific spot. He did not attack, but he stood there, all of his spine plates deployed, blazing full red, and made a sound from somewhere so deep in his chest that Solon felt it in his back teeth from 30 meters away. The predator looked at Draven for a long moment. Then it backed up. 1 step. 2. It turned and moved into the undergrowth without rushing, which somehow made it worse to watch than if it had fled. The jungle went silent in stages, like sound draining out of a bowl. All 4 signatures disappeared from the scanner. Ray walked to Ferric's position. Draven stepped aside without being asked. Ferric was still pressed against the root wall, both hands flat against it, breathing in short pulls. Ray looked him over. No blood, no obvious injury. He checked Ferric's left arm where he had scraped it against the root wall and found a shallow cut, 3 centimeters, not serious. He opened his field kit, cleaned it, bandaged it with efficient movements, and closed the kit. Ferric stared at him the entire time. Ray did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the last 3 minutes had not already said better. He stepped back. Draven moved to his left side. The spine plates were dimming back to their resting pale blue point 30 meters away. Solon exhaled for what felt like the first time since the attack started and sat down fully on the ground, because his legs were not currently interested in doing anything else. Yasa wrote the incident report 4 times. The first version was factual and clinical and made Draven sound like a piece of deployed equipment, which was the easiest framing, but also felt dishonest in a way she could not defend if pressed. The second version tried to describe what she had actually seen and used the phrase coordinated threat management behavior 3 times in 2 paragraphs, which was accurate, but somehow made the report sound like she was trying to avoid saying something simpler. The third version she deleted after 2 sentences. The fourth version she saved and filed, and it said what it needed to say without decorating it. She did not, however, know what to do with the section that described Draven placing himself between Delegate Ferric and a predator with no command given. She read that paragraph 6 times. It stayed in the report. There was no honest way to take it out. Ferric sat by himself for 3 hours after they established base camp. He did not eat. He did not speak to his observers. He sat on a folded equipment case at the edge of the camp perimeter with his elbows on his knees and looked at the ground in the focused, private way of someone rearranging something inside themselves. His bandaged arm rested across his knee. He looked at it occasionally. When Solon brought him a meal container at the 2-hour mark, Ferric took it without comment. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "How long has that creature been with the human?" "About 2 years," Solon said. "From what I understand." Ferric nodded slowly, as if this answered a question he had not quite finished forming. He opened the meal container, but did not eat from it. Solon left him to it. Ray had set up outside the camp perimeter on a flat rock that overlooked a shallow slope of fern-covered ground leading down to a narrow stream. Draven was behind him, enormous and warm, curled into the closest thing to a resting position his frame allowed, which still left him nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, even folded. His spine plates were off. His breathing was the slow, settled rhythm that meant he was not asleep, but also had no current interest in anything threatening. Ray had his data pad out, adding survey notes from the afternoon. Solon found them there at dusk. He stood at the edge of the rock for a moment, not sure if he was welcome. Ray looked up and moved his kit bag slightly, which was apparently the invitation. Solon sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. The jungle at dusk shifted from daytime noise to evening noise, a different texture of sound, lower and more complex. Somewhere down the slope, water moved over stones. "Can I ask you something?" Solon said. "Go ahead. How does it work?" "The bond." Ray turned a page on the data pad. "There is no system to it. No commands. No training structure. He chooses to stay. Every day." Solon looked at Draven. Draven looked back at him with mild amber attention, then returned to watching the tree lean. "Why would something that powerful choose to follow anyone?" Solon said. He was not being dismissive. He genuinely wanted to understand. Ray was quiet for a moment. "I think it is because I stayed when he was dying. I did not have to. There was no reason to, practically speaking. He was too dangerous, too unstable, too much work for one person with a field kit." He paused. "I think he understood that. Animals understand that. Draven is not exactly an animal. Not in the way you mean." Solon looked at Draven again, differently this time. Draven's spine plates shifted a single slow amber pulse, and then went still. "He did not attack on reflex today," Solon said. "In the jungle. He read the situation and responded to it. I saw it clearly from where I was sitting. The two forward soldiers were never in danger after he arrived. He knew that. He let them be and went for the one that had the delegate." "Yes," Ray said. "That was a choice." "Yes." Solon was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I did not laugh at you. At the mess table. I want you to know that." Ray looked at him. "I know. I noticed." The dusk settled into full dark. Somewhere in the upper canopy, night creatures began their calls. Draven shifted his weight, and the warm movement of air from that small change reached both of them where they Saturday. Yas's voice came over the comm, steady and professional. "Holt, survey lead for the second sweep tomorrow is yours. Depart at 0700. Ray touched his comm, understood. He looked at his data pad. Then he set it down and simply sat with the dark and the sounds and Draven's quiet breathing behind him. Solon stayed a while longer. When he finally stood to go back to camp, he paused with one foot off the rock and looked at Draven. Slowly, not suddenly, he raised his right hand. Draven turned his head, regarded the gesture, then leaned forward and placed his nose briefly against Solon's open palm. The contact lasted 2 seconds. Then Draven pulled back and looked at the treeline again. Solon walked back to camp with the feeling of having been measured by something very old and passed without being entirely sure why. The second survey sweep took 8 hours and produced the most complete xenobiology record of Mavoris, 7 taken in 30 years, the doctor. Breen said so in writing, which was the closest she came to celebration. She sent the assessment to Ray through the Sindura's internal comm system on the 3rd day of the return journey, with one additional line at the bottom. "I told them." Ray read it twice, smiled briefly at his data pad, and did not respond because Dr. Breen preferred short conversations. The return journey was not the same as the outbound one. The mess hall still had its assigned seating habits, and Ray still took his tray to the end of the bench, and Ferric still sat across from him on the second evening. But Ferric came alone this time. No observers, no audience. He put his tray down, opened it, and ate for several minutes without speaking. Ray worked on his survey notes. "I filed a revised request this morning," Ferric said eventually. Ray looked up. "The original request. To have your companion removed from the mission." Ferric did not look at him directly. He was looking at his food with the careful attention of someone who had rehearsed an apology and was deciding whether to use the rehearsed version or say the real one. "I filed a formal retraction. The original request was not based on sound judgment." Ray said nothing. "It was," Ferric continued, "choosing the real version, based on assumptions I made about you before I had any reason to make them. That was not appropriate for someone in my position, or any position." Ray looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Then he went back to his notes. Ferric ate his meal. Then he stood, took his tray to the return shelf, and left without saying anything else. What he had said was enough. He seemed to know that. Solon found Ray in the cargo hold that evening, which was becoming something of a pattern. Ray was sitting on the floor with his back against Draven's shoulder, reading. Draven was watching the door, as he always did, but his spine plates were completely still and dim, which meant he had already assessed Solon as something not requiring attention. Solon took this as a reasonable welcome and sat on a cargo crate nearby. Ferric spoke to me this afternoon, Solon said. What did he say? He asked me to explain the Council's companion classification system, the one that currently lists bonded fauna as personal cargo. Solon paused. He wanted to understand the specific language, where it came from, whether it had been reviewed recently. Ray turned a page. And had it been? Not in 19 years, Solon said. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that is a long time. He is drafting a formal recommendation to revise it. Solon leaned his elbows on his knees. He is not a simple man. Ferric. I have worked near him for 3 years. He has never done something like this before. He does not revise positions easily. Ray looked at Draven, who was still watching the door with patient amber attention. No, Ray said. I think he saw something that did not fit the category he had put in. That is a thing to people, sometimes. Solon nodded. He understood this in a personal way that he did not try to explain out loud. They docked at the Council station on a morning cycle, when the station's outer ring was flooded with the blue-white light used to simulate early day. The docking bay was busy. 3 other vessels were running simultaneous arrival procedures, and the bay floor was full of crew and cargo and the ordinary noise of return. Ray and Draven came down the Sundara's ramp together. The crew members near the base of the ramp moved aside. Not rushing, not flinching, just stepping back with the quiet, considered movement of people making space for something they now understood they had misjudged. Yasa was standing near the bay entrance reviewing the docking manifest. She looked up as Ray passed. She did not nod. She did not speak. But she held the door. Ray walked through it. He did not feel the need to mark the moment. He had not come on this mission to be understood. He had come because Mavori's 7 needed surveying, and he was the best person for it. And those 2 things had been true regardless of what anyone believed about him before, during, or after. The station's main corridor stretched ahead of them, wide and well-lit, busy with the usual traffic of 100 species going about their work. Draven walked beside him, spine plates dim and settled, each step placed with that fluid, unhurried precision that still turned heads in every corridor they entered. People who had never seen a Vorthari in anything other than a military record stopped and watched. Some took a cautious step back. Some stood completely still. One young researcher, barely out of training by the look of her, pressed herself against the wall and stared with wide eyes. Draven looked at her for one moment as he passed. Then he looked forward again and kept walking. Ray did not look back. He did not feel vindicated. He had never needed them to believe in him before the jungle. He had only needed the jungle to end with everyone still breathing that he looked up at Draven. Draven looked down at him with those old amber eyes, and the barest blue pulse moved once along his spine, slow and warm. They walked on.